Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We got some big news today, and just a short time ago, a response from Donald Trump. With just 22 days left until Trump becomes president, the Obama administration taking steps to punish Russia for allegedly orchestrating a state-sponsored hacking campaign that both the CIA and the FBI say was designed in part to help Trump win the election. The White House announcing sanctions against 2 Russian spy agencies and 3 companies that allegedly supported the hack, sanctions against 4 high-ranking intelligence officials and 2 suspected hackers who will face a travel ban and have their U.S. assets frozen. The ejection of what the White House calls 35 Russian intelligence operatives who've been ordered to leave the U.S. within 72 hours. The shutting down of 2 Russian-owned compounds, one in New York and one in Maryland, and the release of evidence of Russian cyber activity, including the network addresses of computers allegedly used by Russians to launch hacking attacks. The White House has indicated its response could go beyond those announced today and potentially include covert operations. In a statement blaming the highest levels of the Russian government for the attack, President Obama said, quote, "All Americans should be alarmed by Russia's actions." The State Department, meanwhile, said the U.S. steps came in response not just to hacks, but in response to a pattern of harassment of U.S. diplomats abroad in Russia, including arbitrary police stops, physical assault, and the broadcast on state TV of personal details about our personnel that put them at risk. We have much more on this story, including a reaction from congressional Republicans, the Russians, and Donald Trump himself. First, we want to get an update on the latest from NBC News Pentagon correspondent Hans Nichols. Hans, why today, why now, and why this?
Well, they've been building this towards this for a long time. And the answer to the why this is that the White House finally settled on what something they thought the public response, at least, was going to be proportional. And that is they wanted to escalate, but they didn't want to escalate too far. So when you look at the universe of sanctions, it's really a suite of sanctions, right? You mentioned the individuals, the institutions, then the persona non grata declaration for those 35 intelligence officers. You know, the one that sort of I find most intriguing is the sanctions on the 4 individuals. These are high-ranking, and the chief and then his 3 deputies of the GRU, which is their intelligence agencies. That's interesting to me, Chris, because in the past we've heard from President Obama that he thinks sanctions against Russians, if not toothless and if not useless, sometimes don't actually modify behavior. So that's the one that I have the most question about. And then the other question we have is what's more to come? Because as you mentioned, there's a very clear hint from the president that we could have more action. It could be covert action, and it could be something that the president nor anyone in his administration never acknowledges. Chris?
All right, Hans Nichols, thanks for that update. Appreciate it. Part of the Russian response today involved mockery of the outgoing Obama administration, one Russian political leader comparing the administration to, quote, political corpses. The Russian embassy in the UK tweeting out a picture of a duck with the word lame in all caps written across it. Today on MSNBC, meanwhile, GOP Congressman Trent Franks suggested that if the Russians did successfully commit criminal theft and political sabotage, it was a public service for Americans.
The bottom line, if they succeeded, if Russia succeeded in giving the American people information that was accurate, then they merely did what the media should have done.
Top congressional Republicans are signaling support for today's actions while also simultaneously attacking the Obama administration. House Speaker Paul Ryan describing today's steps as, quote, overdue. Same word used by Senators John McCain and Lindsey Graham, who also vowed to lead the effort in the new Congress to impose stronger sanctions. Asked about the prospect of sanctions last night during his impromptu press availability standing next to Don King, Trump said this.
I think we ought to get on with our lives. I think that computers have complicated lives very greatly. The whole, age of computer has made it where nobody knows exactly what's going on. We have speed, we have a lot of other things, but I'm not sure you have the kind of security that you need.
The whole age of computer has made it so nobody knows what's going on. That's Trump's exact words. Trump, who has received intelligence briefings on the alleged Russian hacking dating back to August, then followed up today with this statement, quote, "It's time for our country to move on to bigger and better things. Nevertheless, in the interest of our country and its great people, I will meet with leaders of the intelligence community next week in order to be updated on the facts of this situation." Joining me now, Republican strategist Steve Cortez, former advisor to the Trump campaign. Steve, you and the Trump folks do accept or don't accept that this was Russia? You accept the judgment of the intelligence community?
Listen, I'm not an intelligence officer. Yes, I would believe they're correct. I think this is what's important, though, Chris. Time and again, the mainstream media has been reporting today, and for weeks for that matter, that the election was hacked. And that is simply not the case. The DNC
let me stop you right there.
was hacked.
Let me stop you right there. I've never said on this program the election was hacked. In fact, we've been quite careful about the wording here. We're looking at two things that happened. The DNC was hacked, and John Podesta, who, of course, campaign chair for Hillary Clinton, criminal intrusion and what appears to be political sabotage with the intended effect of hurting Hillary Clinton and helping Donald Trump. That's different from saying it's definitive in the outcome. But my question is, does the Trump world accept that that is what happened?
Listen, that's what's been reported. I don't know. I'm not an intelligence officer. Right now, I think that's what the facts. Here's what I do know.
Wait, finish that sentence right now. Finish that sentence right now. I think that's what the facts.
That's what the facts relay. The intelligence agencies of the United States will clearly come, I believe, eventually to the correct conclusions. What is important, I think, though, is that our election, and this is what's important, and this today, I think, was a highly politicized move, if for no other reason than just its timing alone. This was a politicized move because what's going on, Chris, and I think it's just dishonest to say otherwise. What's going on is there is a move to try to delegitimize, to make illegitimate the victory of Donald Trump electorally.
Sure, but here's the issue. You say the timing is suspect. When would the timing not be suspect? Because if the President of the United States had done this before the election, you, Reince Priebus, Steve Bannon, Kellyanne Conway, Donald Trump himself, Mike Pence, and everyone would be screaming bloody murder that the President of the United States, in a rank partisan move, had messed with the election by announcing this before the election. In fact, fellow Republicans saying this is overdue would probably have been saying the same thing. Isn't that true?
Well, listen, also, when you say fellow Republicans, let's be honest about who's saying that. It's primarily John McCain and Lindsey Graham, who have never been friends of the Donald Trump campaign.
Paul Ryan,
let's be clear.
But answer that question. If the timing here is political, the only other option would have been do it before the election, which would have been seen as more political. Don't you agree?
I don't. I think
you don't think if the president, the sitting president, announced sanctions on Russia and said definitively the intelligence community all agreed they were trying to get Donald Trump elected, that would not be a more political move?
Hold on. Guessing motive is not what our intelligence agencies do. They can say that, yes, perhaps they can say that the DNC was hacked. First of all, Podesta was not hacked. He gave into a phishing scheme, which, by the way, was as juvenile as the emails that we all receive about a Nigerian prince.
You think it was his fault?
Yes, who falls for that?
It is the fault.
What kind of a senile grandfather falls for that sort of?
You believe John Podesta is a senile
scheme?
grandfather because he was the victim of a phishing attack?
Yes, but here's the more important point too. What we keep talking about is I don't know who did the hacking of the DNC. Podesta was not hacked; he fell for a scheme. The DNC was hacked. That is clear. Who did it? I don't know. What we do know, though, is what was revealed by the hack, and what was revealed was a Democratic Party that was corrupt to its core, particularly when it involved their primary and Bernie Sanders. And the more the American people learned about the Democratic Party and the more they learned about Hillary Clinton, the less they liked and trusted them. And it's one of the reasons we won.
That's right. I don't think that's borne out by the data, but let's just talk for a minute about this idea that this was John Podesta's fault. It does appear to have been a phishing link. Criminal statutes on hacking do include that kind of behavior, right? So if you, under false pretenses, get someone's account through a phishing link, that is a criminal violation, just to be clear on what the law says hacking is.
Sure. Listen, I'm not saying that it was the act of a gentleman, right, to steal his emails. But my point is,
right. So then the question becomes: is there any methodology of obtaining information that you think would invalidate it? Right. So if gunmen showed up at Trump Tower today, took everyone hostage, broke in and stole a bunch of documents, but the documents were interesting, you'd be cool with all of us reading them, right?
No, I clearly would not. And listen, cyber hacking cybersecurity in general is a major issue of national security for the United States, from Russia, from China, from a host of nations, and I think we have been feckless in our response to that, and not just this administration, but the previous administration under George W. Bush. So I am heartened that we're going to take this seriously. But it's also just as important, I think, in a political season with a president-elect to not try to in any way act as though these revelations make his victory any less legitimate.
Well,
and if anything,
I think the statement,
what was revealed the true nature of the opposition he was running against.
I do think the statement of the president was pretty narrowly tailored on that. Steve Cortez, I appreciate your time tonight, man. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Joining me now, Missouri Secretary of State and 2016 Democratic Senate candidate Jason Kander. Your reaction to today's events?
Well, it's pretty upsetting when it turns out that the president-elect is either not sure how computers work or is just using some sort of feigned ignorance about computers and claiming he thinks they hack themselves to excuse himself from having to accept the facts or listen to the American intelligence community.
Do you think, to Steve Cortez's point, I saw some polling from YouGov about 50% of Hillary Clinton voters thinking that Russians had actually tampered with the voting files, right? Which is not true, or there's no evidence of that whatsoever. That's not what is on the table. Do you think there is legitimate concern from the Trump folks, from others, that Democrats are playing this up too much? It is an attempt to delegitimize, and they're ramping up the rhetoric to an unhealthy level.
What really worries me is the Trump camp's perception that this is somehow just a part of American partisan politics. We used to have this saying that we used all the time in this country, which was politics stops at the water's edge. And the reason that we did that is because we're one American family, and we have arguments amongst one another about what direction we should go. But it's sort of like if you were arguing with your kid brother or your kid sister, and then somebody from another house in your neighborhood came in to try and beat them up. You would stand up and you would protect them, and you would protect your house. That's how it really works in this country, is that we have arguments with one another, but if somebody tries to come in and go after one of us, we all stand up and we protect this country. And that's what I want President Trump to do in 22 days, is stand up and protect the country. Don't just worry about protecting his own insecurities.
You've served in the armed forces yourself, and I imagine have had occasion in that capacity to make use of intelligence that comes from DIA or other intelligence offices. Are you personally convinced, satisfied that this consensus is accurate, particularly as someone like myself, of the generation that came of age in the era of the Iraq War, a kind of scarring experience with regards to the credibility of intelligence?
There's absolutely no reason to reach any conclusion other than this is exactly what happened. When you have every intelligence agency saying this, it's not really a very similar situation to after 9/11 in the sense that there's not this great deal of pressure. There wasn't this event like 9/11 that's pressuring the intelligence community to come to a decision of any kind. But, you asked about my experience with it. I actually view it from the perspective of somebody who, I'm a former Army intelligence officer, and in 2006, I was in Afghanistan gathering intelligence, risking my life, going into rooms that, there were some shady characters in, and I would on occasion have to wonder whether I was going to get out of that room. And there are still people doing that all over the country, or all over the world. And so whether it's Russian hacking or any other kind of intelligence, when the president-elect communicates the idea that he's not interested or doesn't believe in the credibility of that intelligence, I can't imagine how that would have made me feel back when my commander-in-chief at the time, President Bush, if he had said that he wasn't interested in that information, it would have affected the way I felt about it.
Yeah, it's a good point. And to that, I mean, the statement from the president-elect today is basically, we know he has been briefed on this, but I'll meet with him next week. There's almost a kind of begrudging quality to the statement.
It's really concerning. These folks are about to work for him in 22 days. And what I'm worried about is a president who is only interested in hearing from the intelligence community when they give him information that confirms what he already thought.
Right.
And I'm not worried about that as a Democrat I'm worried about that as somebody who lives in the United States of America and has a family. And I'm counting on this next president, just like we've counted on this one, to protect me and protect my family. We are all counting on him to do that. And when he would rather pretend that he thinks computers hack themselves, he has a big leadership test coming up, and that is this. He is about to have to decide whether or not he is going to put himself first or put the safety of the country first. And in order to put the safety of the country first, he's got to trust the U.S. intelligence community at least more than he does what he already had in mind himself.
Jason Kander, thanks for your time tonight. I appreciate it.